Hi everyone. Welcome. We're going to wait 2 minutes so everyone can join, and then we can start. We can get started when you're ready. Can you see my screen, by the way?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this FIPRA Network webinar on the US election. I think we're all still processing around the world, not just Donald Trump's victory last week, but also the scale of it and what that might mean for the agenda that he decides to pursue in his second administration. I'm delighted to be joined by one of the best informed, best networked people on Capitol Hill, Rhod Shaw, to run through and analyze this with us today. We've got about an hour. As you were just hearing, there's a Q&A function. Please send us questions as we go along. Rod's going to tell us, what just happened and give us a bit of analysis, and we'll have plenty of time for discussion and Q&A. And I guess broadly, what we want to cover today is to get a sense of what just happened, the scale of that victory, the emerging priorities of a Trump White House, both at home and abroad. And then I think a question that companies and governments outside the US, as well as inside, are grappling with all around the world, which is, how do you engage with the new Trump administration, and how do you manage some of the risks and opportunities that are clearly on the horizon now? So there's a lot to cover. Without any more ado, I will hand over to Rhod to just introduce himself briefly and tell us what on earth just happened.
Well, thanks, Paul. I love the idea of doing this in 1 hour when it's been therapy sessions for lots of people who are elated and people that are despondent over the election over the last week. And so it's taken more than an hour, but appreciate the opportunity to chat with you. Wish we were doing this once again over a pint in one of, let's see, I forget, Brazen Head? I forget where we met, but anyhow, in Dublin. But one of the things I think that is most important as I sit here as a part of a bipartisan firm in Washington that's been very involved with, the political scene, both sides of the aisle, all the dynamics leading up to the election, is first and foremost to me, what's most interesting is actually something people aren't really talking about. And that is, to me, a major takeaway was there actually was an incredible statistical lack of enthusiasm out of the Democrats when it came to the election. And so lots of people start these conversations with, were the pollsters right or wrong? And the answer was they were generally right. I think they were very close, because there was a general sense Trump was doing very well in the swing states that were going to be necessary. Everything was kind of within the margin of error. To a certain degree, that's kind of the way it played out. I would argue for the country, it's like it didn't hinge on like one vote per state, and we had everybody up in arms over whether or not the election results worked. But here are the numbers that I just find fascinating, because then it goes into a little bit about I think the psyche and the dynamic of what we saw and what I think is going to be in action, as best I can tell. That is, in 2020, 158 million Americans voted. Right off the bat, what is interesting is, at least as of this morning, in 2024, 146 million Americans voted. Now, if I never read before the election any forecaster, prognosticator talking about a reduction of that magnitude of, basically, 10 million, and we'll see what the final numbers are, but let's say 10 million fewer voters showing up. And the reason that's interesting to me is it's not just the raw number, it's actually what was going on in people's minds. Democrats thought they were going into this election with an incredibly strong hand. They had passed the IIJA, they had passed the IRA, they had abortion on the ballot, they had forgiven student debt and made a play on that. They thought interest rates and unemployment in the economy was trending better. And they spent a lot of time focusing on Donald Trump personally in January 6th. And when the Biden-Harris shift occurred, there was this expectation on their side that this is going to generate a lot of enthusiasm. And you saw, even in whether it's anecdotal, social, news, whatever, the sense of the turnout at her events and all those things were really foretelling a big Democrat wave that was just not present 6 months ago. And then what really messed with the Washington minds, I think, was this kind of poll that showed up out of Iowa by a reputable pollster that said, looks like the Trump or the Harris wave is actually out there. It's materializing. And for a lot of the presentations I was giving in conversations I had with clients right after that was, it's a data point. I don't know if it's an accurate one, and I don't know if it's foretelling anything. But it is a data point you take into account. So those who wanted to read that as a manifestation of excitement saw it that way, and others saw it as an outlier. It didn't look like it was reflective of anything that other polling in Iowa showed. But when you have that feeling going in, you had that dynamic. Republicans at the same time going into the election, I also felt very good about their case for a number of reasons. One of which was in 2016 and 2020, there was always this talk about kind of the silent Trump voter, that they didn't want to be out front, they weren't going to say it out loud, et cetera. And what you saw as you moved around the country, and I've been in, 10, 11 states over the last 3-4 months, I don't think there's a quiet Trump voter. I think they feel very comfortable, very confident about where they stand. And so whether it's the bumper sticker, the t-shirt, the red hat, whatever, I think Trump voters have become very comfortable about espousing their views. And I think Republicans thought we've crossed that Rubicon. We've got people that are comfortable to be out advocating and espousing. I think they also felt that they owned the psychological malaise around the economy. And so they felt like they'd really won that, so that you were seeing polling time and time again, giving Republicans a very strong hand when it came to who's best for tackling inflation, who's best for job creation, et cetera. You had what I would argue is the number one, and I'll talk about this in just a second, the number one topic really that became the focal point for a lot of discussions is immigration. And Republicans felt really good about where they stood on immigration as a safety issue, as an economic issue, law and order, all that. And then you also saw Republicans seeing anecdotal and statistical support that they were really picking up a stronger percentage of Latino voters, a stronger percentage of, Black and particularly males. And so they were looking at that and saying, we have a really good hand to play. And so both teams, I think, got to election morning thinking, I feel good about what tonight can do. And so I think that's to a certain degree why there's so much shock amongst Democrats, is I think they did wake up feeling pretty good and were surprised to find out not only was it not good for them, they actually kind of lost every race that mattered to them that was going to be close to a certain degree. That's a little hyperbole, but it's close. One final thing, just on this opening part, I'm just looking down at my notes because I find this amazing. Between 2020 and 2024, Trump and the Republicans gained support. So it may not be that they won the county, but they gained support in 2,541 counties in the United States. Okay, so between 2020 and 2024, they've gained support. Whether if they were behind, they closed the gap or went ahead in 2,541 counties. Democrats gained votes in 272. That, I mean, and I know what the first question everyone says is yes, but the Democrat counties are big. Let me also, and so that's where all the population is. So that's really not that telling. Actually, it's incredibly telling. In New York City, Republicans gained 11 points over what they had done the previous cycle. It was happening in the Bronx, Westchester, Queens, Manhattan. So what's interesting is it was not just, okay, red, rural, lots of counties stayed the way they are, blue, urban state. Nope. Republicans did well everywhere. And I thought those numbers were particularly telling. So I'll pause there for a second, Paul. I know that's a lot to kind of throw out, but to me, the start of this was if you had gone to any of the watchers before and said Democrats were going to be down 10 million votes, that Kamala Harris was going to get 10 million actual fewer votes than Joe Biden got in 2020, I don't think anyone probably would have believed it. Donald Trump got basically 1 million more than he got in 2020. But to me, the real story is with all the things the Democrats thought they had, 10 million, and again, the voting population's getting larger. So not only did it not keep track with, the growth in that, 10 million Democrats chose to not show up. And that, I think, is a really interesting number that we will all be dissecting for a while as political creatures.
Well, that's a tremendous opening to kind of give us a sense of just what did happen here. If we just stick on the numbers at the moment and the sort of Lyndon B. Johnson question about the importance of being able to count in politics. I know all the results aren't in yet on the House, but do you see any effective domestic constraints on President Trump and a second Trump administration, or is that just about his own maybe ability to prioritize or delegate or whatever?
Yeah, I think he's got an incredibly strong hand, and I think let's call it like the Republican infrastructure is there to support it because they've been waiting to deal with immigration. They've been waiting to deal with the tax bill. They have been waiting to deal with a lot of these issues. And so I think there's been pent up demand that's ready to be unleashed. And when you have the House, which they, will have, and it won't be by a large margin, probably the high water mark is 222, something like that. So, if 218 is your majority, you don't have a lot of wiggle room there. And we can talk about that dynamic down the road too. But I think he's going to have a lot of running room, and I think there's going to be a lot of desire on his part and by the Republicans, whether it's at the federal, state, local level, to seize on this first 100 days, first 6 months to move a lot of it while they have momentum. They feel they have a mandate. It was a big electoral college vote, even though the actual relative numbers aren't that wildly off. But it was a mandate election in their mind. So I don't, I think the question is for some people, do the courts, are they part of one of the checks and balances of this? What happens with the Congress? The courts have been making pretty favorable decisions for controlling and reducing the side of federalism. So I think when you have a team taking over that's hoping to reduce regulation, get the government out of people's ways, I think they're going to have a lot of tailwind for the foreseeable future.
No, sorry, yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say the one other thing, just as table setting, because again, this will all get unpacked as we go further into the questions people have or that you have. What I thought was interesting, it's the only time I can say, I think in this election in advance, if we were talking months ago, and for many of us we were, I said something that I think has proven to be at least an accurate snapshot. So I'd like to at least be right once on something. And that is, I kept saying I thought this election was going to be more cultural than economic. And that what was going to happen is the cultural battles would play out through economic topics, but it was not, I'm trying to get the economics right. And it's in the reverse. It was really more I think this is how voters feel and how they see identity politics, either in a benefit to themselves or as something that they don't like. And I mean, immigration is a good example of that. But I also think what you saw in the voting of, African American, Black males, Latinos, et cetera, I think you saw a lot of people starting to say, I'm tired. The bridge has gone too far about how left the Democrats will go. And my identity is not my definer. I have a values system here that I'm concerned about. And I really think that's a lot of what happened here, which also explains why the aftershock here may be true for those who are around the globe, but I think the aftershock in the United States is, it's one thing if you lose on an economic fight. If you and I are battling over $1 at the poker table, one of us can decide, how much I like that, hurt, whatever, but you kind of move on. If we're fighting over our values, there is no kind of like, well, okay, that's okay. You feel bad if you've lost. You feel elated if you have won, because it's a values thing. And I think that explains why half the country is elated and goes, we're going to turn the ship in a different direction than it has been heading for several generations. Even under Republican presidencies, I think this is the most far-reaching shift we're probably going to see in American politics in many decades. And I think it's why Democrats are so despondent, because they're like, wow, we lost on our values. And again, they have that whole checklist of things where they thought they were reinforcing their values, and that's going to hurt. So this election did not resolve the neighbor to neighbor dynamic. It may have resolved control of government, but it has not resolved the hearts and minds of people by, I think, accommodating. That'll be interesting to see if President Trump can bridge that gap, can find ways to do that. That is all to be determined.
Yeah, that's really interesting on the sort of deeper the tectonic plates maybe shifting a bit, and we might come back to that later, because I think one of the questions in lots of other capitals around the world is whether there might be any constraints coming in 2 years' time through the midterms, because what you're suggesting there is that this might be a bigger shift that plays out over a longer time. But just while we're still on the sort of formation of this administration and Republicans' desire to hit the ground running, I wonder if you can give us a sense of sort of how quickly we'll start to see the clues that people are looking for on kind of policy headlines through sort of personnel, whether Trump can make appointments faster than is usual, whether he can short circuit or take for granted some of the kind of congressional approval side of things. And I guess the lesson that a lot of people have turned back to outside the US from the first Trump term is this idea that you need to take him seriously, but not literally, and that there will be a lot to play for, even on some of these headline policy commitments, like raising tariffs across the board on sort of friend and foe alike. And I just wonder how quickly you think we might start to get clues.
I would argue we have them already, and we're gonna. I think this is going to be as fast to hit the ground running as I've seen, and I think it's because he would even say that was the lesson he learned from last time. In 2016, he didn't think he had the right people that weren't either up to speed, ready for the job, pre-vetted, loyal to his vision, prepared to articulate his vision. This time they've been thinking about that before they got to this moment. But you're already seeing, I think, real indicators of where his priorities are and how he's trying to affect the infrastructure that he is going to manage. One, what are his first announcements? Well, one of the first announcement out there is going to be who's in charge of the immigration topic, right? So when people say you're taking him literally on the deportation plan, I think the answer is you should take him literally, because he didn't announce his energy secretary first, right? I mean, and actually, to be honest, hasn't named his Defense Department. I mean, it's an immigration czar. And so I think when people go, are they really committed to it? I'd say yes. And then on top of that, I'm not sure. And I just find this entertaining to myself. I'm not sure I've ever heard a president say my number one priority, it doesn't matter what the cost is, we're just going to do it. Because when somebody asks him how much money is it going to cost to do this, find people, get them, move them back to the country of origin, like how much money is, he said, it doesn't matter, we have to do it. Now, that's, hyperbole to a certain degree, but most people who just are elected officials or have just won don't say, well, I don't care about the cost, I'm just going to do it no matter what. I think that's a sign of how committed he is to doing it. So when you see, Stephen Miller and the other names who were involved in immigration coming up front, and that's his bent, and that was arguably one of his strongest attracting topics for his voters, I think you're going to see it very quickly. So you're also seeing, as we play out, literally, the Capitol is right over my shoulder. We know what is playing out today and over the last couple of days is the universe around Trump has been signaling to the U.S. Senate, get out of the way for his nominations. It can take a long time to get a nomination up, go through the hearing, the vetting, and then get to the vote. There's a lot of talk about, hey, just actually one of the things it's inside the Beltway game, but it's called recess appointments, where if the Congress is not around, the president can appoint somebody. They can't stay past the next election. But in that case, if there was a recess in January or February of this year, they got 2 years to run. So there's a lot of people, Elon Musk and others, saying, hey, go into recess immediately if you're a Republican, so we can fill his administration and go even quicker because there will be people in there. Do I really think the Congress is going to go into recess? I probably bet it probably doesn't do that. But again, gives you an idea of how much the pedal to the metal is to fill positions, and you're seeing it now. And I would also just point out, as people try to watch where Trump has been and where he is, in 2016, there was lots of media around people coming up to Bedminster, and they would walk by the cameras and you would see who's getting interviewed. And there was this big kind of PR show around how that administration was coming together. It's not happening this time. It's been vetted. They've been working on it. And now that, when you hear the name, it's because the name is actually the person that's getting the job. And I think that's also probably a sign of their approach and how this is going to be different than what the previous 4 years were like.
So that sounds like we're going to get clues, as you say. We've got some already, and we can start to fill in some of this policy picture probably a lot more quickly than usual. I mean, this sense that he's essentially in power already, and that's how governments abroad and companies are thinking about this. So if we stick on policy for a moment, I mean, I know a huge issue on this side of the Atlantic, but also on the other side of the Pacific to you is trade and tariffs. There's a kind of assumption, I think, in a lot of governments around the world that there's going to be a negotiating tactic here. And this is one of our questions that's come in, that Trump, there will be a selectivity about whatever happens on tariffs. Even if tariffs are going up on allies as well as rivals, there will be something to negotiate there, even with China, say. How accurate do you think that reading is? And what kind of things are going to influence the Trump administration from outside on this?
It's a seminal question everyone is asking in this market as well. I think you're right. Everything will start off with, this is what I intend to do. Now react to it. And whether it's bilateral or some forms of multilateral negotiations over things. And I think it's going to be sector by sector potentially, right? I could see that he says, I'm doing this tariffs for across the board on a given market. And then somebody comes in and says, let me talk to you about steel. And they say, okay, we're gonna think about steel. And then somebody comes in and says, I want to talk about airplanes. And they say, okay, we're going to talk about I mean, like, I assume what he does is he gets you to the table because here's what you're going to face. And then, let's negotiate out what makes sense for both parties to the best of their ability on something that otherwise can be unilateral. And I think he does have a lot of, authority to be able to do a lot of this unilaterally. So I think you're right. I think it's going to be a negotiating tactic, but I don't think people should be thinking it's a negotiating tactic that means he's going to zero, and he's thinking it's a negotiating tactic to be used elsewhere. Because the other thing I think observers need to consider is this is also going to be the year they are going to have the Trump tax cuts from his first presidency up for consideration. They expire. So Congress has to act. And that means they got to find pay-fors. And pay-fors are tough to do. And I'm not an economist, so I can't speak to exactly how tariffs work. But intuitively, there's a lot of people that believe tariffs, can be inflationary and can raise costs. And at the same time, in the short run, it can look good on your score sheet. Hey, I think we're gonna get this much new money that does not come from an increase in individual tax rates or a change in corporate tax rate, et cetera. So not only do I think tariffs are part of the psychology of kind of the America first and the America reshoring effort that he's famous for, but I also think there's going to be more sensitivity or support for it, because those who have to pass the tax bill are also going to be looking at very tough decisions over where do we find more revenue. Tariffs fill part of that bucket.
Yeah, I think that's a really important angle that people maybe aren't giving enough weight to outside the US as they think about how to engage the new administration on this. I just want to pick up on something else you mentioned there, Rhod, which is reshoring. And I wonder how, again, how literally or seriously we should be taking this. I'm kind of asking for friends in Dublin who've got their own election in less than 3 weeks' time and are looking at a lot of big US firms who not only employ a lot of people here but book a lot of their profits through Ireland, and there'll be a lot of countries in a similar space. How much pressure is going to come on those companies?
Yeah, I don't know how much it's going to be. You need to pull up stakes from where you are to come back, and I don't know the answer. So again, this is trying to base it off of the conversations I've had with people in the months leading up to this. But my sense is it's where are you investing your next dollar? If you're groundbreaking physically or otherwise, where is that getting spent? I think where you're going to see American companies under pressure is you better be doing that here. But you don't really hear, I don't talk to a lot of policymakers who say, my goal here is to make sure that, the company that is in Ireland, in Mexico, whatever, needs to pick up and move back. I mean, I'm sure people would love that to be the case, but I think it's like, we've got to stop incenting people to go there in the first place. We need to actually make this market some more attractive. So again, the incremental investment is starting to happen here. Now, there may be others in different perspectives that nope, they really do want to pull it up kind of from the roots where they exist elsewhere. But that's not really been what I've heard as I talk to House members and senators, that's their focus, or they believe that's how far this goes. Now, where it gets really interesting on the friend-shoring, reshoring thing is, the role of Canada, Mexico is going to be interesting, because there are many people who think that is the way to kind of greenwash product into the United States. And so while we have free trade agreements, there's a question of, is this how the Chinese, get product into the United States? Because they basically make it and then it gets assembled in Mexico and comes in through Canada, whatever. And so even at our two borders, there's a real question of how does trade policy work when for a long time this country has incented American companies to invest into those markets as part of the North American economy. And I think people don't know exactly how that's going to play out, because again, I think it's going to depend who's under the microscope. If it's timber, that may get treated differently than automobiles. That might get treated differently than foodstuffs. That might get treated differently than energy. I mean, it will be very curious to see what happens both with Mexico and Canada being oil producing countries and having been at the forefront of a lot of our issues like Keystone Pipeline and whatnot. Where do those things come in? And is that, tariff and trade also affects how you move those products back and forth across the border that are really important, particularly somebody who wants American energy costs to go down. So there are so many moving parts. I'm not smart enough to know what the answer to that is, but that seems to be the filter I'm hearing people talk about. It's really more about incremental than ripping up by the root.
Yeah, that's really useful. And you mentioned there some of the kind of trade-offs in sort of terms of domestic factors that will be in play, and all of these things, of course, will be complicated decisions. I mean, if I take another policy area of kind of climate change and green energy and so on, we've seen Trump on the campaign trail, and also some of the people around him, talk about kind of winding down the IRA subsidy incentive, some of the programs, or bringing back the unspent tax dollars or whatever. That's obviously of huge global interest, because those investments are driving a lot of the global market in terms of things like sustainable aviation fuel, or green energy kind of generally. But are there domestic sort of constraints here about potentially manufacturing jobs in traditionally swing states, or are there factors that might constrain a complete wind down of the IRA programs?
It's a great question. It's a multi-trillion-dollar question everybody has on their mind too. So you're asking the right ones. These are the kinds of questions I've been getting from clients, CEOs, boards that I've been talking to since Tuesday. I want to go back in history to talk a little bit about lessons learned for those who've been around and why that may be applicable here. Remember when after President Obama had passed the Affordable Care Act, Republicans had campaigned on that they would repeal it. And what had happened is, between the time of enactment and the time they got kind of authority to tackle it, lots of things had been baked in. And it made it very hard to just actually repeal. There was just lots of shrapnel flying around when it came to just outright repeal. Now, the vast majority of Congress was not here when that happened. It's amazing how quickly we're having turnover in the House of Representatives. So most people were not here for that day, amazingly enough. But there are enough that are in senior leadership spots that go, when you promise to rip and replace, you got to be prepared to actually have the votes to actually repeal it. And that can be hard. And so there is some self-awareness, I think, over how do we want to articulate what we're doing with the IIJA and IRA. The second part of that is, how do you start that negotiation? And what I think will probably happen in some form or fashion, whether it's official or not, is the leadership in the White House will go to the economy, business, and say, look, let's presume all of it is zeroed out. Now come convince me why the provision you care about should stay, or in this case, be added in. So psychologically, they're going to start with it's gone. But I think be open to what are the ones that actually make sense for good reason. So I think there's nobody who's going to compel them to keep the $7,500 tax credit for people buying electric vehicles. I think that's probably gone by the wayside. I think there will be other provisions like that are going to fall by the wayside. But again, I think it'll be interesting and challenging to rip up by the roots. And there's another reason for that, not just that it's difficult, but also think of it this way, just as pure politics. Republicans didn't vote for the IRA, IIJA, in large part, right? Ironically enough, most of that money has not been spent yet, but businesses have been making decisions and investments on having that available via tax credits or outright grants or loan guarantees, a number of different structures. And all that's been set up. That's all about to now start rolling. So you're going to have a lot of constituents in Republican areas that where actually the majority of that money was going anyways. Ironically enough, the Democrats passed something where the majority of the money is apparently going into red areas, and saying to people, and those constituents are going to show up saying, I've made all these commitments. I've spent all this time and money to get myself ready for this next phase or this rollout or this ground breaking. Are they really prepared to actually tell them, nope, that's not a good enough project? And I'm going to be the one who actually blocks it from happening now that it was up and actually close. I think if if it had never happened, they would have a problem not recreating it. But now that it's created, I think it's going to be tough to actually pull it out. And when you talk to a lot of Republican members, that's kind of what they say. This is again before the election, but they were kind of saying, look, if we catch all the levers of authority, there are some things that we think are actually going to make sense or need to at least be amended to broaden the universe who can benefit from them. So that actually things that were maybe just in the case of solar or wind, maybe there's now ways for clean gas to also avail itself. And so you might see it play out that way. But I think the Affordable Care Act was a powerful lesson, and don't promise too much that many, I think, remember. And then I think it's, the IIJA and IRA monies are somewhat out in the wild, but there's more to come. And I think it's going to be hard to just actually zero it out. And that's kind of what, again, that's what people are kind of thinking is the starting point. But I do think anybody, company, people that are advising companies, I do think you might very well be hearing, tonight, January, 3rd, January 20th, we're starting on the assumption that we have a blank sheet of paper. We're not going to start with, we're working off this and cutting down. We're at zero. You can come talk to me about why 45X is good for you, et cetera.
That's a really interesting example, I think, Rhod, of just how the domestic constraints might or interests might create a bit of sort of engagement opportunity. And I want to come back to companies and engagement in a moment. But while we're still on policy, I think we probably do have to touch on foreign policy, because I know that, Ukraine for the Europeans, Taiwan for a lot of people in East Asia, and there are other issues too, where Trump has sent signals, or some of the people close to him have, including his own family, have sent signals, and they're obviously big issues in those regions, and more broadly for the world economy. But I just wonder how much you think Trump is going to put effort into any of these. I mean, Middle East is obviously another big one. Even for a kind of imperial presidency, there must be some limits to kind of bandwidth and prioritization, especially when there's so much on the domestic agenda. Do you have any sense of that yet, or how will we start to know where Trump might look to really broker these big geopolitical deals?
That is one definitely above my pay grade dev insight, in terms of I'm in the room, I am not. I guess I would, in conversations I've had this week with a couple of folks, in kind of in leadership roles, what I think is interesting is you see European leaders already saying, well, the signal is we're on our own. America is no longer to be dependent upon on these levels. I actually think the Trump world looks at that and says that's success. That's what we've been trying to do for a long time, is to tell people you have to pick up your share. So when people say, well, we need to have our 2% for NATO, and, we're going to have to do that, we're going to have to do more than that because, we don't trust the Americans. There is some corner in the US that says that makes us feel bad because we've liked being the policeman of the world and the beat, the cop on the beat. There's others that are like, I'm tired of that. I'm tired of the expense. I'm tired of sacrificing our money, our children to wars around the world. And so when people may say that, that's being heard in two very different ways here in the US. But I think, like most things, I think you can take Trump at his word. I think he is going to focus a lot on what to do about the Ukraine. I don't know what that plays out. I don't know what their strategy is. I don't know what he does with Putin and Zelensky. I don't know how that works, but I don't think he's going to be so busy he doesn't actually prioritize that. I do think that will be out there. I don't know what they do around what's happened in the Middle East. And what a lot of us all talk about is, and who knows what's going on in the South China Sea, and really what happens with China. And are we going to be so busy doing all these other things? What happens in that geopolitical dynamic? And so I think there's a lot of questions over, do we know the deal he wants to go and take in the Middle East? No, I don't think we know exactly what that deal is. Do we know what the solution to the Ukraine war is? No. But I don't think we're going to go, wow, 9 months from now, well, I kind of forgot to prioritize that. I think he's going to fill up this cabinet, and it's, again, one of the questions I saw is, these recess appointments. I think part of the reason they're really rushing on it is this is a long agenda, and we haven't even covered everything so far, right? Like, there's a lot on their plate. They intend to lock and load, and he's got 4 years. This is a rare time to have somebody come in who understands how the situation, the game is played. He's got 4 years, and as you rightfully pointed out earlier, midterms are usually unfriendly to the team in power. So if you're really playing the game, you're thinking, I got 2. They want to get as many people into place so they can have people negotiating internationally. Interesting, a UN person is early in the announcements, right? I mean, again, I think that speaks to follow immigration, follow international dynamics. I think the next big one we'll see is what's going on with Treasury, because that will affect tariffs. That will be a part of the tax deal. That will be a part, again, what they can do with the IRA provisions. I think you'll see those as being kind of the 3 big centerpieces of who you see early, and that's evidence that they're not going to get distracted by just one.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the big question. I think that a lot of other governments and foreign-based companies have. I'm just going to finish off on the sort of broad policy stuff before we get into company engagement. Just with this. Just to test with you, really, this sense that I certainly see here in the UK that the government is doing initial thinking about, if you like, a kind of package to put to Trump, or to engage with the administration on. Some of that could be a bit more alignment on China policy or trade policy generally. Some of it could be about buying more American. Some of it could be about some foreign policy alignment. But do you think that sense of, other governments can package up a set of things that they think the administration will be interested in and potentially distract a little bit or open a negotiation about bits that they don't want to do? Is that feasible? And I'll just reference as well one of the questions that we had earlier about tariffs, which is a bit more detailed one, but it asks about the cumulative effect if Trump does do, a sort of 10% across the board plus something tough on Mexico. I mean, without getting necessarily into the detail of all of that, Mexico is probably one of those countries that will be thinking about a package. There's more than one thing that Trump and the administration is potentially interested in with Mexico. Is that likely to be sellable to a Trump administration?
Well, I think, again, if you take kind of the top priorities, let's say we use Mexico as an example, and I think I even saw Juan Mauricio may have dialed into this. So if he's got thoughts, he should dump them into the chat. But I think there's going to be a macro deal probably necessary with Mexico, because you're going to have immigration sitting as one of these core principles, and the administration is going to want to see Mexico keep out, take back, process a lot of folks. And if at the same time we want to put tariffs on it. We want to get, manufacturers out of Mexico coming. There's going to be a lot of moving parts. I think if the Mexican government looks around and says, we can actually open the spigot here on immigration different if you don't do the following on tariffs or whatever the various levers are. I think this is an administration that's probably going to consider all those options. I don't think they're going to be unilateral. So to the question we saw earlier about, are they cumulative? I would argue, I'm sure people will be thinking about whether they get cumulative. If I've got something on steel and then I do one across the board, I think they will be taking that into account. But I think it's going to be cumulative across topic. And so if you are, if you're a NATO country that is stepped up on your contribution to NATO and you're showing what your commitments are there, that probably is going to impact what he says and thinks about tariffs. And if you're somebody who said, I'm not doing anything any different, that probably is going to have an impact on the trade negotiations. So I think it's going to be, broader than just cumulative of a tariff or, what are you doing with your own national defense spending?
Yeah, so we've talked a lot about how governments around the world are going to try and engage with the Trump administration. And you've mentioned companies, and I think that's an interesting one to come on to. So how should companies, particularly outside the US, maybe think about how best to engage with that? Is that through their own governments, or are there things that they can be doing to address some of the Trump priorities?
One of the things I think, whether it's a company or a country, needs to do at this point is to go back and look back over what it is they have been saying about the Trump administration when he was in power and what they have said about it over the last 4 years, what they've said about Democrats, the Biden administration, et cetera. Because I think this is an administration that's going to be very aware. We go back to who they're putting into positions. They're stressing publicly, loyalty matters, right? So I think one of the first things is don't be tone deaf. If you are a country or a company that has said certain things and you think nobody's paid attention, that you've either said laudatory things or denigrated, I think people are going to pay attention to that. And so I think first is self-assess. Where have we been? What have we said? How consistent are we, et cetera? So if you've been taking pot shots, I wouldn't just turn around and say, well, I think you should have, the CEO or the president or the prime minister pick up the phone and call them without having thought about what it is you said, why you said it, how you either massage that or stay with it, whatever it is your principles are. But I think first do a little honest self-assessment as to what it is you've said and done. The second thing is, and it's human nature. People want to be contacted. They want to hear. So you do need to figure out how to reach out. Whether that means somebody has to reach out at the corporate level directly to the president, probably not, unless you were, the Fortune 20 or whatever. But if you are a player in this economy and in this town, yeah, you've got to figure out how to communicate into his universe, and you've got to, again, be self-aware of what you said or not what you said. But I think one of the other things that will be interesting, this is more corporate than intergovernmental, is I think companies forget often when elections are done, they suddenly go with all the elected official wants is to talk to the C-suite. And actually, what you just saw the Republicans do and what Trump do is not talk to the C-suite. This was not my job is here to make Wall Street happy. It was talking about middle America, unhappy voters. And so I actually think people who think about how do they convey to this administration, to this Congress, that it's not that this is just good for my stock price. This is not just good for my income, but actually this is good for the base of voters who voted for you. They're going to be interested. I'd be trying to get their voices in there. So think about how you convey your message on social media. Look, I mean, there's no secret. Elon Musk is heavily involved in this, and there's this platform he has. you might want to think about what you're saying on that, or if you've never said anything on it, or is your idea, I'm always going to have the photograph be of the CEO or the C-suite talking to people, or am I going to actually have workers that are the ones that are most likely got the flag in their yard? Am I going to have them communicate part of these messages? How do I integrate that in? So I think there's self-assess. You do need to, it's true in any administration, it will be true for this one. You need to figure out how to actually engage. And I would think about how you engage may be a little different with this one. It's a different time. And just if I can for a second, because I also know we're going to get short on time, one of the questions that I think pivots into this is somebody was asking, do we think Trump will consider the legacy and what this does with Republicans for 2028? And one of the things I've been doing over the last year is I've gone back and listened to a really great podcast called Wicked Games, and it's about the American elections. It's a 45-minute podcast. I'm not paid. I'm no promotional consideration here, but they do about a 45-minute analysis of every election in the United States since the first. And what I've found is it's both illuminating and it's actually pretty good therapy. And that one, we always have ugly times. Immigration is always an issue. There's always challenges. The Civil War was at our worst, but we actually often have very fractious dynamics. But also what it is reminding me is parties evolve. Parties come and go. We no longer have a Whig party in the United States. The Federalists are long gone. And actually, the Democrats are not what they were in the 1920s and 30s. It's a different universe. At one point, the Democrats were the party of the segregation South, right? So parties morph and move. And so a lot of what I get, again, over this last week in particular, people are like, oh my God, the Republican Party I know is dead. And I go, yes, probably is in many ways. It is not the country club Republican, if that's what you want to think it was at one point, or however you want to generalize it. But the bottom line is this is one that is much more worker focused. This is one that is focused on tariffs. I never thought I'd be around where I saw Republican candidates and presidents openly supporting tariffs instead of free trade. I don't think that's a blip. I don't think this is Donald Trump. I think this is actually a shift. And so I actually think he probably believes if he can do what's on this extensive list, and again, we didn't even go through everything that's on the to-do list. If he thinks he can accomplish much of that, I think he thinks that is putting his team in a better position for 2028, regardless of who picks up the mantle, whether it's J.D. Vance or some other candidate at the presidential level, or those in the Senate or House or at state houses. But I think they think this gives them a base to show this is what we meant. And I go back to, just to squeeze this in, started with this is cultural. It's manifest through economics. And I think one of the places you're going to see the cultural plane, we'll see how the country reacts to it, is I do think we're going to see them, as they look at deregulating and getting the government out, you're going to see a lot of that in cultural matters, whether that's in the education realm and their interest in critical race theories and what's happening at schools, particularly around LGBTQ and those issues that are tied into either education or in dynamics, and just the diversity and inclusion agenda that the Biden administration had really front and center. And they said, this is one of the first things we're going to filter a lot of our policy making through. I think you're going to see these guys rip apart. And I think they believe that is going to be part of that legacy for 2028, to say we put the brakes on woke, whatever that means to the eye of the beholder. And I think that's going to be much of the mission that will manifest in economic ways, but I think it's part of the cultural identification part that, again, drove this values emotional dynamic of voters. Now, again, I said to you at the outset, but 10 million fewer people voted. And so you could say, well, that emotion didn't actually generate. And the answer is that is true, and that is surprising. I too am still trying to figure out how to interpret that. What does that mean? And both parties are going to be spending the next couple of years going, what does that mean, so that each sees they can grow their number. Democrats are going to go, how do I at least get back to where I was? And I think Republicans are thinking, if they can deliver on this, they'll be even in better shape for the reasons I pointed out about that crazy statistic around counties. I mean, 2,500 counties to 270. Like that I think is what people are going to be trying to assess, how they either improve on that if you're Republicans or you whittle back at that if you're Democrats.
Yeah, there's a lot still to understand and analyze, I think, about this. But I just a quick follow-up on the legacy question, because I think already I think most of us would feel Trump has been and will be one of the most consequential presidents, of the post-war, post-Second World War era. And you talked about that right at the head of the meeting. Do you think that's enough for him, or are there things that where he wants to have permanently reshaped the American political landscape, not just in terms of kind of where his party is, but in terms of the broad issues?
I hate to say I'm not qualified to answer that, but I've not met the man. I've not sat and talked with him over dinner and said, tell me about your psyche. So there's a lot I do not know, right? I would, however, as an observer and a watcher and talking to lots of people who have, senators, House members who spend lots of time with him over the years, not just here in the recent campaign trail, but when he was out of office, when he was in office. I in many ways think he was surprised in 2016 when he found himself actually the candidate that survived that crazy primary, right? I mean, I don't think he has sat forever going, I must be the president of the United States to be able to have this vision executed all the way along. I think in some ways the world has evolved in a way that has given him this opportunity and this platform. And so I think if he looks at, he gets half of this, I think he thinks, holy cow, I have really changed. I've changed the nature of this party, and I've changed the nation in his mind for the better. I think that's probably enough, because that's more than most anyone else, right? I mean, I'm not sure when you look back over whether you think it's George Herbert Walker or Bill Clinton or Barack Obama, whatever. When you go up and you're gonna, if he executes these things, and you say what had more lasting impact, it's going to be an open question to see what he can deliver on. But he is potentially one of the most consequential presidents, at least of my lifetime, and it could be of I always love the David McCullough line, which is, we all expect every president to be exceptional. And he said, but exceptional means what? You're in the top 10% of your class in something. Like, not everyone's exceptional. Like, if you're exceptional, it means you have to be the top of whatever. And he said, and therefore, I don't understand why Americans think we're going to get 100% return on exceptional out of our presidents. We should probably get 10% should be great, 10 should be horrible. And, the rest should probably be somewhere in the middle. And lo and behold, when you listen to McCullough go through it, we've had 45, 46, 47 presidents. 4 to 5 of them have been exceptional. 4 to 5 of them have been terrible. Like, he's like, those are the numbers we expect. And I think what we're going to see now is for Republicans who saw Ronald Reagan being that exceptional, I think there is a sense now, different than anything else, that this is not a candidate or a presidency that is just manning the tiller. I believe they think this is changing the direction of the boat. And therefore, I think there's a lot of expectation on their side that this will be exceptional. I think that also speaks to the fear Democrats have. They believe that's exactly right. And they believe that is actually stripping out the things that they care and value about the most. And that's why it's consequential, right? It's consequential because both teams think there's a lot at stake to what gets achieved or what does not get achieved, particularly in this next 2 years. That may be actually a pretty good ending spot. I don't know. I hadn't planned to get us there, but that may work.
I think that's that peroration, Rhod, I think is the perfect place to end. Look, there's so much here. We didn't get through every single question, but there's a lot to sort of think about and follow up on, and I'm sure everyone on the call and everyone across their own markets will be engaging heavily with this over the next few years. So we look forward to hearing your thoughts and insights as we go along. But look, just to say a huge thank you to you. That was a tremendous hour of unpicking what just happened and what might be coming next, and how we should all engage with it. For everyone on the call, the recording will be available, and we'll circulate that on the FIPRA social media channels and the website and so on. Please do be in touch and discuss across the network, or talk to the FIPRA member companies in your markets about questions that are coming up here, and engagement with the new US administration. But for now, look, huge thank you to Rhod. It's been an invaluable hour of analysis while this is all still going on at such pace in DC. Thank you very much, and look forward to talking again soon, Rhod.
Always, Paul. Thank you very much. Appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks a lot, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Cheers.